So there Lot stood, facing perhaps the biggest choice of his entire life up until this point. Because up until now, they hadn't been his decisions. It had been Abraham. Abraham had been chosen by God, had chosen to give up the place where he was and head out to a new place. And Lot, he had just sort of followed along. Abraham had always been his favorite uncle. They'd always been close. Abraham had no children of his own. So Lot just came along for the ride. It hadn't been a choice for him, though it had been a big one for Abraham. But now they were facing a crisis. They had just done too well in this new land. And their flocks had grown and they just needed more space. And so it was time to separate. And Abraham, who had always been a gracious uncle, gave to Lot the choice. And stood there with Lot and he said this: if you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right, then I will go to the left. A simple decision. But Lot had to make it. And it was a tough decision. It wasn't tough because it was a moral decision. There was no moral element. It wasn't a question of right and wrong. But very clearly, whatever Lot chose would have big repercussions. It would change everything. Who he would meet, what he would do, the things that would happen to him. This was a momentous decision. And we've all been there, haven't we? We've been right there with Lot, facing a big decision in our lives. Not a moral decision, but a difficult decision. Which way will I go? And it's not easy to choose sometimes, isn't it? We have all struggled with tough decisions, whether they be the big decisions like, what school will I go to? What career will I pursue? Will I go out with this person? Will I marry that one? And also the other decisions of life that sometimes maybe seem unimportant. Should I go with the gray robe or the black one? Should I go parachuting today? That's maybe a big one. But these are tough decisions. And the assumption, of course, is as we go through life, that we're on our own for those decisions. That you use your mind, you use your intellect, maybe you use your gut. But for good or bad, the result of this decision is your own and you have to live with it. That's what most of the world around us believes. But we believe differently. Christians believe, in fact, that we are not alone in our decisions and that we have a God who didn't just create us and leave us here to find our own path, but who has a plan for us. And our choice basically is to follow in that path or to go our own way. And so it says in the letter of the Ephesians, as we read this morning, we have been destined according to the purpose of Him who accomplishes all things according to His counsel and will. God has a plan for you. And that does not mean, as far as I'm concerned, that there's sort of this path that has been laid before you and you have to follow every single step. And that if you make one misstep, you ruin the whole thing. I don't think it works like that. I think that God does leave us with our own free will. And how it works is a little bit differently. Yes, we make our own choices, and we are free to make them. But the promise is as we go forward, if we are open and listening for God's direction in our lives, God will guide us and will work through the circumstances as they arise in our lives to make sure that our life conforms to the path God has decided for us. And so take, for example, poor Lot, standing there facing his decision. Does he go left or does he go right? If he goes left, he goes down into the plain. He goes down towards the city of Sodom. If he goes right, he goes up into the hills and into the land of Canaan. Now, of course, Lot chose to go left. upon which there was a great doom. Abram, for his part, he ended up going right. And wonder of wonders, he landed in Canaan, the place that God had always intended for him to be, the place that God had promised to him. So the choice was free. It was all up to Lot, but somehow God worked in and through that choice to make it all work out according to the plan that he had from the beginning, a plan that is central to God's will for this world. God has a plan. God has a path that he wants you to follow. Not every step, but he has a path that he wants to conform your life to. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? It's not hard to believe that God would have that kind of power, that God could work in and through the circumstances of this world to make things work out for your life. What is hard to believe for us is that you could matter that much to God. That God could be so interested in your life and your path that he would take that kind of trouble. We have a hard time believing that. Because we have a hard time believing that we are that important. But we are. We have a hard time believing that because the world tells us so differently. We live in a world that day after day seems to be giving us this message that you don't matter. That you're just another cog in the machine. I mean, they send us to school where they teach us all things, but they don't necessarily teach us to think critically. They don't necessarily teach us to be creative in our lives. Most of all, they try to train us. To find a job, to assume some place in the economy, to keep things going. And you go out there and you get a job, and your employer goes out of their way to get the message across to you that you don't matter, that you're easily replaced, that you don't deserve security in your job, that you're just there to follow the rules and procedures, and anyone else can do it. You don't matter. The message of this world, again and again, is passed on to us. You don't really matter. And in fact, the only way that we are allowed, according to the thinking of this world, to be different and unique is in the things that we buy. And so we're told that we can tailor our individuality by the phone that we buy, the clothes that we wear, the television that we watch. But other than that, you don't matter. You only matter as a consumer. And to tell you in the face of that continual message that drones upon us day after day, that you matter, that God cares what you do and the decisions you make and will take part if you allow him, that's a controversial message. But it is true that God cares. And God wants to guide your life in a path that conforms to his will and plan for you. And if you are ready and willing, God will guide you. Does that mean that God will actually speak to you and say, go this way or that way? Will you hear voices? I doubt it. I really do. It says that Abram heard the voice of God. But it doesn't say what the voice sounded like or how Abram knew that it was God. But I wouldn't expect that. I wouldn't expect that God would speak up at some key moment in your life. So there has to be another way. There has to be another way of opening yourself up to hear God's direction for your life. And so I would like to suggest to you a spiritual practice that you can use. It is the spiritual practice of discernment. The spiritual practice of discernment is a practice of the Christian church. It is what we do as a church together to find God's path for us individually and corporately. And And it is important that this is a discipline for the whole church. It's not an individual thing. You can't just practice this all on your own. You need to be part of a community. And the promise is this. The promise is that when we come together, God will guide us corporately. And so one way a church might do this is by forming together small groups. In a church, you might have small groups of people here and there who over time get together, meet with one another, talk with one another. And if you do that over time, what happens, of course, is you begin to build trust together. You have trust and confidence in those people. And if you have a small group like that, what are you going to do when you are faced with a really big decision in your life? You will feel able to go to those people and in confidence and trust, talk to them. And here is the promise that we have in the Scriptures. It says in the letter to Romans, I myself feel confident about you, my brothers and sisters, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with knowledge, and able to instruct one another. The promise is, as we build up that Christian community together, God will guide us through one another. Now that does not mean, and I want to stress this, that does not mean that we tell each other what to do. In fact, more often than not, it's about listening to one another, really listening. Hearing what it is that someone's facing. And listening to someone and knowing very well how they tend to deal with problems and stresses and strains. And by doing that, listening and helping them maybe to get a bit of perspective on their decision, that is how we help one another to discern God's path for our lives. But that is, I've got to say, a long-term goal. To build up that kind of trust among ourselves is something that takes work and it takes time. We can't do that right now. Nevertheless, I don't just want to talk about the practice of discernment today. So I would like at this time to actually do a little experiment. A little experiment in discernment. I want to talk about how we can actually, right here, right now, open ourselves up to find God's path for us. Because I suspect that every single person here, all of you, have in your life some decision that you've been struggling with. We all do. And as I talk about that, you're probably thinking of one thing you've been struggling with, and then maybe one of those great, big, huge, momentous decisions. You know, do I live here or there? Do I work here or there? Or whatever it may be. Or it may be a decision that seems less momentous, but for whatever reason, it's a decision that has been weighing on you very heavily. You have a decision. And what I want you to do right now is I want you to close your eyes if you like. But I want you to imagine whatever decision you've been struggling with. Imagine it before you. I mean, imagine yourself standing there like Lot and asking the question, well, do I go left or do I go right? It's one or the other. What's it going to be? How can we help one another as we face those kind of decisions in life? First thing I want you to do is this, as you consider that decision. I want you to trust me on this one. Because it's not logical, it doesn't make sense. But I want you to trust me when I tell you, God cares what you decide. God cares about your decision. Trust that. And you may experience it. Now here's what I want you to do. And I know this is extraordinary, but I want you to get up briefly. And I want you to turn, and I want you just to loosely form a circle with, 3, 4, 5 people. Just get up now. Stand up. It's not easy. Turn and face a few other people and form a loose circle. Stand or sit together. I'm not going to make you talk, don't worry. Okay, so as you stand in the circle, you may hold hands if you wish, you don't have going to make you tell the person about the decision you face. But this is what I want you to do right now. I want you to pray silently for the person on your left hand. Just pray that God would give them wisdom and understanding and discernment as they face their decision. Pray for them. And now I want you to pray for the person on your right hand. Same thing. And know right now that there's somebody praying for you in your decision. Okay, thank you. Turn and face me again. Sit down if you like. And once again, I want you to imagine that picture in front of you. That decision you have. Do I go left or do I go right? That thought. First of all, I want you to consult with your mind. I want you to ask, what is your head telling you about this decision? Because you know what? God does speak through your head. God speaks to your intellect. He gave it to you. What is God saying to you, to your head, about your decision? And now what is God saying to your heart? Because sometimes your heart tells you different things. And God speaks through your heart as well. Attend to that. Okay, here's the hard thing. Here's the hard thing. I suspect that if you've been struggling with some decision in your life and in your path, God has been speaking to you. God speaks. Sometimes through other people, sometimes through circumstances, sometimes through your head or your heart. But God has been speaking. Problem is we don't hear. And the reason we don't hear is because we are surrounded by so much noise and so much busyness that we don't stop to listen. Take a few moments in silence and listen for God's prompting. I wouldn't be surprised if God has been speaking to you and you have known what He wants for you to do. But you just resisted that guidance. I would encourage you now to embrace the direction God gives to you. And move forward like Abram moved forward with boldness into a new place. Confident that you have sought the will of God. And God has been there for you. God speaks. He spoke to Abram, He guided Abram, set him on a path and on a plan that is still unfolding to this day. God has a path for you and a plan, and if you are faithful and you seek His guidance in this and various ways, you can move forward with confidence. Amen.